When the classroom emptied, she locked the door, and what she taught him wasn't in any textbook. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting warm, golden stripes across the empty classroom. Dust motes danced lazily in the beams, and the faint smell of chalk and polished wood lingered in the air. I sat at a desk near the back, my notebook open, though I hardly knew what to write. Something about the quiet of the room made my thoughts both sharper and more scattered at the same time. She entered without knocking, her presence immediately commanding the space. Even after weeks of attending her lectures, I could still feel the subtle aura she carried, calm, confident, yet quietly magnetic. Her heels clicked softly against the wooden floor, and I felt a little jolt in my chest, the way her footsteps seemed to echo differently when she was close. She smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips, and before I could process it, she reached for the door and locked it. "Lessons aren't finished yet," she said, the smirk in her voice sending a shiver down my spine. "I'm going to teach you something they'll never write in books." That one sentence did something to the room, to me. The click of the lock was sharper than any school bell I'd ever heard. And yet, instead of fear, there was a strange thrill, a mix of anticipation and hesitation. My heart rate quickened, but my mind tried to argue. This was a teacher, a professional, someone I should respect from a safe distance. And yet, the magnetic pull of her presence ignored reason entirely. She moved closer, resting a hand on the edge of a desk near me. The warmth of her body, just an arm's length away, was tangible. I could catch the subtle scent of her perfume, something floral, gentle, and yet impossibly grounding. I realized I was noticing every detail. The way her hair caught the sunlight, the soft way her blouse fell across her shoulders, even the faint rhythm of her breathing as she watched me with those observant, quiet eyes. The assignment she handed me wasn't part of any syllabus. It was something personal, something that required thought, observation, and honesty. I scribbled the instructions nervously, aware that every glance she gave me seemed to carry an unspoken message. Her proximity made the ordinary act of writing feel like a shared secret, a subtle intimacy that didn't need words. I stole a glance at her and caught her watching me, her expression unreadable yet filled with subtle warmth. There was a quiet challenge in her eyes, a hint of amusement, and a strange tenderness that made my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. I wanted to speak, to ask what she meant, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I focused on the assignment, feeling the brush of her sleeve against my arm as she adjusted something on the desk, and realized how acutely aware I was of every small contact. The golden light continued to stretch across the room, time slowing as if the universe had decided this moment deserved to linger. I knew, even then, that this was the beginning of something I didn't fully understand. A lesson not in any book, but in subtle tension, quiet connection, and the unspoken emotions that hung between us like fragile threads waiting to be explored. The afternoon had grown quieter, the golden light softening as it stretched across the classroom. I was still seated at my desk, trying to focus on the unusual assignment she had handed me, but every instinct in my body seemed drawn to her presence. She moved around the room with deliberate ease, collecting papers, straightening a chair, and somehow making even these ordinary motions feel purposeful, magnetic. When she came to my side, leaning over my shoulder to glance at my notes, I became painfully aware of the small distance between us. Her hair brushed against my arm, and the warmth radiating from her body made my chest tighten. The faint scent of her perfume, subtle but unmistakable, wrapped around me, and I realized I was breathing differently, slower and more conscious, trying not to seem awkward. "Not quite what I expected," she said softly, her voice low, almost a whisper, as if sharing a secret meant only for me. Her eyes met mine, holding a spark of amusement that sent a ripple of electricity through my veins. I wanted to laugh, to answer something clever, but the words felt small and inadequate compared to the intensity of the moment. She reached to adjust a paper on my desk, and our hands brushed. Just a brief touch, fleeting, but it lingered in my mind long after she had pulled away. I felt it in my fingertips, a subtle warmth, and in my chest, a flutter that made me acutely aware of every movement she made. It wasn't just attraction. It was a connection I didn't yet understand, a tension that was as thrilling as it was terrifying. As I worked, she leaned closer again, pointing at a line in my notebook. Her fingers hovered over mine, the smallest gap between us charged with unspoken meaning. I caught the hint of a smile on her lips, and for a moment, the classroom felt suspended in time. Every sound, the scratch of my pen, the faint hum of the radiator, the rustle of papers, was amplified, yet it felt intimate, as though the world had narrowed to this single room, this single interaction. I tried to focus on the task, but my eyes kept drifting to her. The way she tilted her head, the gentle curve of her smile, even the rhythm of her breathing. It all seemed to speak in a language I was just beginning to understand. There was no rush, no need for words, just the quiet, electric acknowledgement of each other's presence. She straightened suddenly, brushing invisible dust from her blouse, and I realized how every small movement she made left an imprint on my mind. The assignment she had given me felt secondary to the lesson unfolding in silence. The lesson of subtle touches, lingering glances, and the unspoken tension that danced between us. As she moved to the front of the classroom, I caught myself smiling, almost without thinking. My chest still ached with anticipation, and I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and frightened me, that something had shifted. Something unspoken had begun. A connection deeper than any syllabus could teach. A spark that would linger long after the classroom was empty. The classroom had emptied of all distractions except for the two of us. The sun had begun its descent, painting the walls with long, warm streaks of amber. The soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the building created a quiet rhythm, almost as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting. She motioned for me to sit closer at her desk, and I obeyed, heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. There was a weight to the air, a gentle gravity pulling us into a shared intimacy neither of us had spoken about yet. She perched gracefully at the edge of her chair, legs crossed, her hands resting loosely on her lap. There was a calm in her posture that contrasted sharply with the fluttering of my own nervous energy. "I want to tell you something," she began softly, her voice carrying the kind of quiet honesty that made the words feel heavier, more important. She spoke of a regret from her early career, a personal mistake she had made that taught her a lesson not found in any book. Her eyes, steady and sincere, never left mine, and I realized that the vulnerability she showed was deliberate, a gift of trust. As she spoke, I felt a new kind of connection forming, one that wasn't about proximity or fleeting touches, but about understanding. I listened intently, every word imprinting itself on my mind, every pause allowing me to sense the depth of her experience and the quiet strength behind it. For the first time, I saw the layers beneath her confident exterior, the fears, the hesitations, the quiet longing that made her human in a way I hadn't fully appreciated before. When I responded, it wasn't with words of advice or empty sympathy. I spoke honestly, admitting the confusion and admiration swirling inside me. She reached out then, resting a hand lightly on my arm. The touch was brief, almost hesitant, but it sent a warmth spreading from my shoulder through my chest, grounding me in the moment. It wasn't just comfort. It was an acknowledgement, a silent affirmation of the trust we were building. Her gaze softened, and she smiled faintly, as if recognizing my internal struggle. "It's not easy," she said quietly, "to let someone in, to see someone truly as they are. But sometimes, the right connection comes when you least expect it." I swallowed hard, aware of the tightness in my throat and the rapid beat of my heart. I wanted to ask her more, to probe deeper into her life and thoughts, but I also understood the fragile balance of this moment. There was an unspoken agreement. This was a safe space, a rare and fleeting intimacy we were both daring to explore. As the golden light continued to stretch across the room, I felt a quiet exhilaration. I was no longer just a student observing a teacher. I was a participant in something profound, subtle, and entirely unexpected. The lesson wasn't in the papers, the notebooks, or the tasks. It was in the trust, the shared vulnerabilities, and the unspoken connection forming between us. In that moment, I realized that some lessons aren't written in books at all. They are lived, felt, and slowly, beautifully understood. The classroom was nearly empty, the corridors outside silent except for the occasional distant footsteps echoing from the main hallway. The late afternoon sun had begun to dip behind the building, casting long, warm shadows across the desks. The light hit the dust in the air just right, making it shimmer faintly, like tiny suspended stars in the golden haze. Everything felt suspended in time, as though the world outside had disappeared entirely. She leaned against the edge of a desk across from me, arms crossed loosely, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The way she held herself, calm, poised, yet effortlessly aware of the space between us, made every movement feel intentional, every glance seem like a quiet conversation. I caught her watching me more than once, and each time our eyes met, a subtle warmth flared through me. It wasn't the kind of attraction shouted in dramatic gestures. It was quiet, deliberate, and piercing in its intensity. I noticed the gentle tilt of her head, the soft arch of her eyebrows as she studied me, and the way her gaze seemed to linger just a moment too long, as if measuring the rhythm of my heartbeat. We moved around the classroom almost mechanically, handing papers back, adjusting chairs, but even in those small, ordinary actions, there was an unspoken choreography. Our hands brushed once, twice, fleeting touches that sent tiny sparks up my arm. Each accidental contact was magnified in my mind, a quiet signal that we were both aware of the growing tension. At one point, I glanced up from my notebook and found her looking at me from across the room. Her eyes softened as they met mine, a silent acknowledgement that neither of us could or wanted to ignore. My chest tightened, a flutter of nervous anticipation mixing with something warmer, something I couldn't yet name. I felt exposed and alive all at once, conscious of every subtle movement of her body, every inflection in her quiet breathing. When she walked past me to straighten a chair, our shoulders brushed again, the contact brief but lingering in my mind long after she had moved. I realized that this was a different kind of closeness. Not loud, not obvious, but delicate, intentional, and deeply charged. Each glance, each brush of skin, each shared space became a language all its own, speaking in pauses, smiles, and the rhythm of unspoken understanding. The sunlight continued to shift, painting the room in warmer hues as if approving the quiet intimacy unfolding within it. My thoughts raced and hesitated in equal measure. The age gap, the societal expectations, the potential for misinterpretation, but none of that mattered in the moment. All that existed was the silent dialogue between us, the electricity in lingering glances, and the growing realization that our connection was moving beyond the ordinary boundaries of student and teacher. As the classroom settled into golden silence, I felt an undeniable truth forming in my chest. This spark, small, subtle, almost invisible, was real. It was ours, fragile yet exhilarating, and I knew that in the days to come, it would deepen, shaping every shared glance, every silent exchange, and every unspoken word between us. The classroom had grown quieter than ever. The sun had dipped lower, sending soft slivers of orange and pink across the walls, and the shadows of desks stretched lazily over the floor. Everything seemed slowed down, heavy with anticipation, as if the world outside had paused to give us this private moment. She motioned for me to come closer to her desk, and I hesitated, acutely aware of the space between us. The air felt charged, not in a loud, dramatic way, but with a delicate tension that made every heartbeat and every movement feel amplified. I sat down, my knees brushing the edge of her chair, and I could sense her awareness, a gentle mirroring of the closeness that neither of us had fully dared to admit yet. "I need to tell you something," she began softly, her voice low and deliberate, carrying a warmth that seemed to seep directly into my chest. There was no smirk this time, no teasing undertone, only honesty, quiet and sincere. She spoke of the hesitations that came with her own life experience, of the careful lines she had always drawn between herself and others. And then, gradually, she admitted what she had felt in our moments together. small sparks of curiosity, fleeting moments of connection, and the strange thrill of being seen by someone who wasn't intimidated by her age or her presence. Her confession, delicate as it was, made the air between us feel heavier in a good way. I realized I had been holding my own feelings in check, too unsure to name them. I feel it too, I said quietly, my voice barely more than a whisper. I don't fully understand it, and I know it's complicated, but I can't ignore it. When I spoke, she reached out, placing her hand gently over mine. The touch was grounding yet electrifying, sending a warmth radiating from my fingertips up my arm. Her skin was soft, her touch deliberate but not rushed, and in that moment, it felt like a quiet agreement. We were both willing to acknowledge what had been quietly growing between us. We sat there, hands close but not fully entwined, talking openly for the first time. I shared my hesitation, the swirl of excitement and fear, the recognition of the age difference, and the uncertainty of crossing invisible boundaries. She nodded, understanding, validating, never judging. Her presence itself was comforting, steady, calm, and patient, as if the classroom had transformed into a sanctuary where vulnerability was not only allowed but encouraged. Our eyes met often, lingering a fraction longer than necessary, conveying emotions that words could not capture. The unspoken understanding, the subtle warmth, the quiet admiration, the tender hesitation, created an intimacy that was both thrilling and grounding. By the time we finally fell silent, the light had softened into a muted, golden haze, the room enveloped in quiet. I felt a mixture of exhilaration and calm. Exhilaration at having voiced what I felt, calm in the realization that she reciprocated. It wasn't a dramatic declaration of love, nor a complete unraveling of emotions. It was far better. It was honest, grounded, and real, a foundation on which something profound could grow. In that moment, I understood that true intimacy didn't need fireworks. Sometimes, it began with quiet honesty, shared vulnerability, and the courage to look someone in the eye and admit what you truly feel. And in that classroom, in that warm, golden light, our connection had taken its first unshakable, sincere step forward. The rain tapped softly against the classroom windows, a gentle rhythm that filled the space with a quiet, soothing backdrop. The afternoon had faded into a muted gray, and the warm glow of the desk lamps painted the room in soft pools of light. The world outside seemed distant, muffled by the steady patter of droplets, leaving the two of us cocooned in our own little universe. She sat across from me at her desk, a calm presence radiating a quiet confidence that somehow made the storm outside feel even more intimate. I could see the subtle lines of thought in her eyes, the way her lips curved when she was about to say something yet held back. There was an unspoken pause between us, heavy with anticipation and mutual understanding. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was alive, almost tangible, like the air itself was aware of our closeness. She leaned slightly forward, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and the motion was so delicate it seemed to slow time. Her hand hovered near mine, and without thinking, I reached out. Our fingers touched lightly, a tentative connection that sent a warmth rippling up my arm. It was more than a brush of skin. It was reassurance, comfort, and a quiet acknowledgement of trust. Her eyes met mine, steady and unflinching, and I felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and serenity. We didn't speak immediately. Instead, I noticed the little things. The rise and fall of her chest with each breath, the soft rustle of her clothing as she adjusted her posture, the gentle tilt of her head when she observed me. Every detail was magnified in the dim light, each movement carrying meaning. When our hands lingered a fraction longer than necessary, it wasn't just a touch. It was a conversation, an exchange of emotion without words. At one point, she leaned closer to show me something on a notebook, and our shoulders brushed. The warmth radiating from her body was immediate and grounding, like an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. My heart skipped a beat, but there was no panic, only a quiet thrill, the realization that these small, deliberate acts of closeness were shaping a bond one couldn't yet fully define. I found myself stealing glances at her, captivated by the subtle elegance in her movements, the calm confidence in her posture, and the vulnerability that shone through in fleeting moments. She returned those glances with equal intensity, a silent acknowledgement that what we shared was intimate, rare, and deeply significant. The rain continued its gentle rhythm, a natural accompaniment to the quiet intimacy between us. Her presence was a grounding force, steady and patient. Yet each shared glance, brush of hands, and subtle touch carried an unspoken promise. A promise of trust, connection, and understanding. In that classroom, surrounded by the soft glow of lamps and the rhythmic patter of rain, I realized the true beauty of intimacy. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was in the quiet, deliberate closeness, the shared warmth of presence, the subtle touches and lingering looks that spoke louder than words ever could. And in that still, suspended moment, I understood that this was more than attraction. It was a bond slowly, beautifully, and irrevocably forming. Morning light spilled gently into the classroom, soft and golden, painting the room in warmth after the cool gray of yesterday's rain. Dust particles drifted lazily in the sunlight, catching it like tiny, suspended stars. The world outside seemed quiet, almost hesitant, as though giving space for the fragile, beautiful connection that had been growing between us to finally find its place. She was already at her desk, papers neatly stacked, her posture calm and poised. The subtle strength in her presence had always drawn me in, but now there was something different. An unspoken acknowledgement of the bond we had nurtured, a quiet understanding that what had started as curiosity had matured into something meaningful and profound. I stepped closer, aware of the small distance still separating us. Each movement carried weight, deliberate, slow, conscious of the emotions vibrating in the space between us. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine with a warmth that made my chest tighten in the most comforting way. There was no smirk this time, no teasing undertone, just honesty, and a calm acceptance that mirrored my own feelings. We spoke softly, carefully, acknowledging the connection that had grown through lingering glances, whispered confidences, and subtle touches. I expressed my gratitude for her patience, for the lessons she had imparted. Not those written in books, but the lessons of trust, vulnerability, and emotional courage. She smiled, a gentle, radiant curve of her lips, and admitted that she had learned from me too, about seeing someone truly, without assumptions or pretense, and about allowing herself to embrace a connection she hadn't expected. There was a long pause, heavy with anticipation, and then she reached out. Our hands met and lingered together, fingers brushing, holding, grounding us both in the present. The warmth of her touch was comforting and electrifying at once, a perfect reflection of the journey we had taken together. I felt the steady rhythm of her pulse beneath my fingers, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the subtle vibrations of a presence that had become essential to me. We shared small gestures, brief touches on the arm, a lingering smile, the soft brush of hair from her face that spoke volumes. Each movement was deliberate yet natural, an affirmation of our feelings without needing dramatic declarations. The age gap, once an unspoken concern, had transformed into something that enriched our connection, bringing depth, maturity, and perspective that neither of us had anticipated. As the classroom filled with the gentle morning glow, I realized that the lessons weren't over. They had simply transformed. We had learned about patience, emotional honesty, and the quiet power of intimacy. More than that, we had discovered the courage to acknowledge our feelings and the understanding that love could grow slowly, naturally, and beautifully, even in unexpected circumstances. When the final bell rang and the school day officially began, we stayed a moment longer, hands still lightly touching, eyes still locked. There were no words necessary. The connection, the trust, the affection we had cultivated said everything. In that moment, I knew that the lessons she had promised weren't in books. They were in us, lived, felt, and now cherished. And with that quiet understanding, our hearts were connected, ready to explore the bond we had built with patience, respect, and a slow-burning love that promised depth, warmth, and lasting intimacy. If you enjoyed this slow burn story of unexpected connection and age gap romance, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next heartfelt story. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a connection that changed everything?